Welcome to the Storypowers Podcast, the show about the power of stories, the people who tell them, and why you should be doing it too. I'm your host, Francisco Mahfuz. My guest today is one of the best speakers I've met, and also my good friend, Tobias Rodrigues. Tobias is a communication coach at the ESSE Business School in Barcelona. He also offers effective team-playing workshops, leadership coaching, keynote speeches, and conflict mediation to international brands, including eBay, Henkel, HP, King, and PayPal. In short, he helps companies build badass teams. If that wasn't enough, Tobias also makes the most lethal margaritas I've ever had. I had a lot of fun talking to him. If you like it too, please leave us an iTunes review and tell your friends about it. If you don't like it, you can always tell your enemies. I'll take all the listeners I can get. All right, ladies and gentlemen, please enjoy the great and powerful Tobias Rodrigues. Tobias, welcome to the show. How are you doing, my man?
I'm good. Thank you for having me here in this confinement of Barcelona.
Yes, it's strange times we live in. I feel obliged to tell everyone when we're recording these interviews that we are in the middle of a pandemic, which always sounds very strange saying, but locked in our house, it seems the perfect time to be recording podcasts over the internet.
No, I just say as long as you keep up with the morale, because if you're recording podcasts but your mood is shit, then it's really not great to be.
That is true. Tobias, I had a strange first job. I got hired to build a website for the Brazilian government, but I hardly knew how to use a computer at the time. It explains a lot of why my country is such a mess, but my first job seems pretty normal compared to yours. Do you want to tell us a bit about that?
So my first job actually was doing cleaning in my dad's and his brother's company, Bestway in Winnipeg, Manitoba, where I was born and grew up. And it was a terrible first job because it was on Saturday mornings. I'd get there at about 6 a.m. and I had to have the whole thing all nice and clean before 9 a.m. when clients started coming. And then the worst part came because then I'd have to go to the back parts where the clients were not allowed. And that meant these weird basements that were dark and it was scary. And yeah, so that was my first job. I think the job that you're referring to is my first profession or vocation as a Catholic priest. So what would you like to know about that?
Well, I find it interesting that your first professional experience included scary, dark basements, which is my recollection of the church when I was young. But yes, that is very much the one I think it would be interesting to talk about.
Well, it was a fantastic experience. It was a great investment of my life, 15 years. So 6 years in the seminary plus 9 years active service to the Catholic communities. I also did 5 years in Rome where I did my master's degree in Bible studies. And I worked before that for 4 years in the Azores in the communities.
And a lot of people, myself included before I met you, tend to think that a priest's job is mostly preaching and officiating ceremonies or doing marriage and relationship counseling. But you had some fairly intense experiences working with prisoners and terminal patients, right?
Yeah, one of the good things about being a Catholic priest is you get the opportunity to be a jack of all trades. And there's lots of service to be done that you can then tailor to your likings or your talents. So if you're an academic, there's lots of room there. If you're more of a spiritual kind of person, there's also opportunities for that. I was also always a little bit of a renegade. At the age of 14, my family and I went to visit our grandparents in the Azores. We're 6 of us. And I guess my parents, trying to avoid a mutiny, they didn't tell us that we were visiting. They told us we were visiting, but in reality, we were actually moving there. So at the age of 14, when I got that news, it was, a traumatic experience. I Winnipeg, Canada in the 1990s compared to a small island in the middle of the Atlantic. So it was a shock in terms of my identity. Who the hell am I? Everything that I thought I was disappeared from one day to another, including most of my language, my friends, my hobbies. I remember going to school and talking about The Simpsons. And everybody would look at me, this guy, where is he coming from? Like, what are the Simpsons, right? So it was a real shocker in terms of identity and also in terms of relationships with people. The people that I most trusted. My parents were able to do one of the most horrible things at the time for me, which today I see as a nice experience. So what I'm getting at is that that made me kind of question things and want to find answers and want to make sure that those answers apply to the real world. So I was kind of the geeky guy. I studied a lot. I liked studying. I did a lot of the philosophy and the psychology and the theology. And then I tried to practice that in the real world. And instead of doing the conventional catechism to the, first grade, second grade, I decided to do my extracurriculum activities in jails, and eventually ended up also being the chaplain of the hospital. So I had the opportunity to deal with people, with humanity in some extreme circumstances.
And the prison experience is one that I think for most people, it's just so beyond what we understand of anything, really. I mean, I just don't think we have any understanding of what goes on. So can you just give me some examples of the type of things you used to do in prison other than performing as a priest?
So I started back when I was still in the seminary. We were three of us at the time, my colleagues Paul, Lou, and Teodoro, and we would visit every Saturday. We'd go mid-afternoon. And these were the golden ages. Back then, the director, Conceição, she was a Catholic, so she was very open to religious services in the jail, and she gave us some freedom. So we had access to all of the facilities for about 2 or 3 hours, where we'd chat, play cards, foosball, and then we'd get to know, if there was someone new that came in, and give them some support. We always knew the ones that were a little bit poorer, and so they'd bum some cigarettes from us. And then we'd celebrate Mass, and Mass was in the open space. The chaplain at the time, Father Jacinto, he would celebrate Mass, and we'd have, the ones that normally come to Mass, which was only a small number. And then they'd go to their cells. That was the regular kind of thing we did every week. And then we had activities. There was a small group that had authorization to leave the jail. So there was a carnival. One year we prepared a small play with the prisoners, and they got to tour around the island during carnival. It was fantastic. They messed it up every single time. They never got the thing in order. There was 3 acts, but it was never in the right order. But the idea was about doing something, getting out there. I think the biggest experience I had was due to Father Jacinto. One day he called us into his office, the 3 of us, and he said, "Okay, it's all set. You guys have a green light." And we were green light for. And I spoke to the director, and she said, "You guys can do the 2-day retreat with the prisoners." And the what? So we had dinner. Well, this was the Saturday after visiting the jail. We went to dinner, and someone joking, one of us, talked about doing a retreat, but we didn't take it seriously at all. And Father Jacinto, he was just crazy out of his head. Fantastic missionary, he's a big mind. So the next Monday morning he called, he got the authorization. And so there we were. We had them from a Friday evening to a Sunday afternoon, 30 prisoners that signed up. We had a different schedule. We had even a different room for them, and no guards. And we got to do a retreat with them, in terms of personal development, reflection, how they could deal with the difficult things that they had done, and how could they move on from that. And it ended epically with a typical mass, and you got these 30 prisoners, and we had some heavy duty. We had Class A drug dealers, we had a pedophile, we had someone that had killed their neighbor over a football game, and there they were, the 30 of them plus the 3 of us, sitting on the ground in a circle, singing "Kumbaya, my Lord." And I remember on the side, the director came to the mass. She was sat on a chair, and there was a tear, running down her face. And then in the end, she said, "You guys, you managed to do in 3 days what I've been trying to do in 30 years." And so that was like one of the sweet moments of, I was 23 or 20, no, before I was 22 at the most. So really rookie, had no idea, all the heart into it and trying to do the best you can. And some nice things happen.
Perhaps it shouldn't be, but the thing that strikes me as more surprising of that story is that anyone actually sings Kumbaya. I think Kumbaya was just the example of the song that no one in real life sings anymore. But then this was a while back, so perhaps.
Oh, yeah, this was a year ago in 1997, my friend. It's been a while.
Yes, we hadn't developed self-awareness back then. Mm-hmm. And I know you met your wife just before you left the church, which seems like very suspicious timing, but we don't need to get into that. What I do want to know is how do you move from priest to speaker, which is how I met you, and corporate trainer? I mean, as soon as you left, what was the story behind that your development into that area?
Sure. Feel free to come back to my wife and the story about her and the end days of a priest. So your question right now is about, so this was in May 2009. At the time, Claudia, she bought me she did a surprise and she bought me a ticket to come see Marisa, who's a fado singer, here in Barcelona at the Palau de la Música.
Okay.
And by then, it had become clear that I could no longer continue as a priest, and we can come back to that if you want in just a moment. And since that was clear, we couldn't stay in Rome. Rome is fine if you're a student, but if you start having an active life, it's a little bit chaotic. So there was no way we're going to stay there, and I had no special place to come. So we came, and on that trip, I remember going to the metro. It was the purple line. I don't remember the station, and it said 30 seconds. And I started laughing internally because, the metro in Rome might say 30 seconds and then 5 minutes and then come back next week. So when the metro actually came and it got down to 0, I said, "This is heaven. I want to live here." So that was when I decided.
A countdown that actually means something.
Exactly. So Claudia had an offer to work here, and I decided to come. I landed here, and so in September, after the vacations, in the meantime, we got a flat, and I was thinking of doing another degree, of going back to school, because I thought, religious stuff, who wants? And Claudia hooked me up with a friend of hers. His name is Agustin. He's a priest. He's now in his 80s. He just retired. And he has this voice like this. And he's got and I said, well, I'm going to do another degree. And he goes, no, you've got more studies than most people ever need. No. You're going to do something quick. I'm going to hook you up. So from there, I went on to do a master's degree in conflict resolution.
Okay.
And he hooked me up with Andres Martin, who was the founder of the Foundation for Emotional Education here in Barcelona. And they had their module on conflict resolution as a pack of Train the Trainer. So it was 5 modules. One of them was conflict resolution, and I was finishing by then the master's degree. And he said, listen, you do the other 4 modules, and then you can do the one on conflict resolution. And so I did. One of the modules there was public speaking. It was in Spanish. And who was the trainer? Florian Muck. Who also a public speaker and now a great friend. And so at the time, I wasn't telling anybody that I used to be a priest. I thought that was a real bummer. And so when I got up to speak, he kind of freaked out that I kind of knew what I was doing. Well, I had 9 years as a priest of experience. So he invited me to Toastmasters. And then from Toastmasters, I did a couple of speeches, started creating. My initial idea actually was to be a mediator in business and family. When I finished the master's, I realized two interesting things. One was, at least at the time, if you wanted to work for the Catalan government, you'd have to have done the course at the Barcelona University. And I didn't do it at the Universidad de Barcelona. I did it at the Universidad Oberta de Catalunya. So I can work there. And then in companies, mediation wasn't as big as it is, for instance, in Holland, the UK, Canada, and the US. If I couldn't do mediation, I decided I'd teach mediation. So I took advantage of my experience in communication and public speaking and built a module in terms of conflict resolution in the workplace. And at Toastmasters, I don't know if you met her, Eleanor Thompson.
I met her before she was still in the club for a while before she left. We had some time together, but she was, I think, on her way out when I joined.
Yeah, so Eleanor is a doctor, and she worked at the PRBB, the Biomedical Research Park of Barcelona, and she ran there an intervals program, which was continuous development program for the whole biomedical research park. And so she invited me to do a module there on dealing with conflict and playing better as a team member. The scientific community is very diverse. And so you needed some good skills in terms of how to be a better team player. And that was my first client. I think it was 2012 or 11. And I've been going back twice a year since then. Now just past last month, I was there doing my program on how to be a better team player.
Okay, and since you've alluded to it a couple of times, you might as well just jump on that. But from your last, not days necessarily, but from when you quit the church, and that decision to quit the church and go into the unknown, I would guess. I mean, that must have been not the easiest decision you've ever taken, I guess.
No, it was painful. So what happened was, due to my experience that I mentioned at the age of 14 and being a little bit, questioning stuff. And when I signed up to be a priest, I signed up to be part of something that would be, in my opinion, profound and meaningful. I wasn't up for much of the traditional status quo stuff. I knew it was there, but then, as I said at the beginning, there's a great field. And that's why I asked to go to Rome and study the Bible, because that's the foundational document, to really get a sense that if my intuitions that, the church could change and could change faster and deeper. And those suspicions were confirmed. The more I studied the Bible, the more I got the feeling that those changes could happen. But, and this is the funny part, was the more I got to know how the Vatican worked, the more I realized that wasn't going to happen the way I had imagined. And that was my mistake. The church is an institution that is 2,000 years old, and you can't ask, a granny to run quickly. They need to go slowly, because if they go quickly, they might get hurt. So when I realized this dilemma, I first try to do what most of my colleagues do, which is, accept the fact that you're going to be part of a very small change in your lifetime, but in the long run, that will pay off. I tried that for about a year. It was about my last year in Rome, or second last year in Rome, and I was miserable. It didn't work. And then that started affecting the work that I was doing. And so the decision became very clear. It was a simple decision, I had to go. It wasn't easy, but So I guess the hardest part was once I realized that I needed to go, it's where do you go from here?
So nowadays, a lot of the work you do is going into companies, usually large international companies, and making their teams better. So the first question I have about that is, what are the most common mistakes or problems you find in how teams are managed or how they're put together? What's almost, if there is such a thing, almost always a problem that you have to deal with when you go in?
So one thing is the magic bullet mistake, which is sometimes the leaders or the companies, for numerous reasons, sometimes it's resources, sometimes it's time. They most of the work is, let's get in this activity and let's just do a morning and then hope that morning of work will magically solve the tensions and the problems and things will get better. One mistake that I normally see is that most teams they're putting out fires. They're not building better infrastructures that can deal or avoid those fires on the whole. It's hard to see companies that there are some, but that really bet in building their teams. Then, related to that, another mistake is focusing on the productivity, on getting results. And the mistake that sometimes it's easy to fall into is to realize that the only way to get that is to start with the people. And so the more you invest in people, the more that pays off. It takes a while. If you want the metaphor of a body, you can do a quick diet, you can have the bikini operation. But if you really want to have a healthy, fit body, it requires some work in terms of getting certain things boxed down in habits. And then that pays off in the long run. Another mistake that for me is a game changer is sometimes leaders assume that people are dumb and they won't be able to do it without me, right? And Liz Wiseman, she wrote a book called Multipliers. So she's from the US and she studied a whole bunch of companies on what makes some teams better than others. Why do some teams actually excel? And she came up with this term, which is called multipliers. Some leaders come in and actually make people better than what they are. They make teams deliver much more than can be expected, and some do the opposite. And the number one, or the stepping stone, is the assumption that you make about people. So when I walk into work with a team, the assumption is people are smart and they will figure it out. And so leaders that have that assumption, the way their teams perform is much better than the other ones.
It's interesting that you say about the leaders who think that people can do it without them. I perhaps was lucky that when I started doing any type of leadership, and this was many years ago when I started managing, I think there was a team of 10 people, and my boss at the time, the team was doing well, and he would come to me and say, what you're doing, I haven't seen you do much today. And I said, I haven't had to do much. I mean, everything's going well. And they said, oh, that's perfect then. Because if you have to do a lot, it's because you haven't taught them anything. Your job is to be useless. Well, not to be useless, but to be unnecessary. If I need you here every day where everything falls apart, then, that's not, you're doing one part of the team, of the leadership job, but you're definitely not doing the educational part or instigating self-reliance and initiative in your team. And so nowadays, when you in corporate environment is perhaps, very far, very distant from your background in the church, how much of that experience still filters through, either through insights or stories that you share in training?
A lot. I would say that 90% of the success is due to my background. As 20th century philosopher Jim Morrison said, people are strange when you're a stranger. People are people, right? Whether in a corporate environment, in their homes, we have multiple identities if we want. We're different a little bit with our friends than we are at work, but human nature is human nature. And my job as a priest for 9 years and those 6 years of the seminary and dealing with people. I worked with kids. I taught kids with special needs. I did, from grade 1 to grade 12. I lived in Jerusalem. I did 5 in Rome. I've been fortunate, very, very fortunate to have dealt with people in many different circumstances. Having been a priest, part of the job description is people open up to you, right? Like bartenders and taxi drivers, we get to see the inside of people's lives. And that gives you some insight into, how people work. So it allows me to be someone that is fairly close to people, someone that is naturally friendly, naturally hopeful. I tend to like to see myself as playful, although I am aware I can be sometimes boring. And that experience, at the second hand, it becomes almost an intuition on how to interact with people. Many of the things that I do, like in terms of what companies do, I don't know. So it goes back to, people are smart, they'll figure it out. My job is not to understand their job better than them. My job is to create the opportunity and the environment that will allow them to get there. And that is fundamentally human nature 101.
So when you have this wealth of experience and stories, and I've seen you tell stories on stage, and you're a great storyteller, but my question is, when you're doing this professionally, do you take time to select and craft whatever stories you're going to use? Does it just come naturally? How does that process work when you go into work in the corporate environment?
Mm-hmm. So scenario number one, I have my fixed trainings. So the 12 steps to become a better team player and the 360 feedback. So the gift of growth, how to say the hard stuff to teammates. And those programs are fixed. So I use the same stories and the same formats. Then the other scenario is when I do a customized training where I'm asked to, I'm briefed, I'm given, this is where we want to go, or this is what we're dealing with. Let's take 2 days and let's work on these issues. So there, typically, when I create a format like that, I typically find an overarching metaphor for the whole program. And then that metaphor is translated both visually, if I have some kind of symbol. I give that metaphor or theme a Greek name. So I try to make use of the ancient languages that I studied. So I always give it a theme in Greek.
Radical erased.
Okay, exactly. And then based on that, I find a story in my experience, most of them direct experience, or stories of people that I met that is related to that theme, and then apply. And so again, you've got a theme. The theme can be very specific to the situation, but it's something that other people share in their experience of living. So I always have like awesome stories to tell about my grandfather or things that I learned in the parishes and people I met that in one way or another relate to the theme that we're working on.
I'm guessing that today was not the first time you did the impression of Father Augustine.
No. I have to practice a lot because he's got a very special voice.
That voice came too easily for something that is just a spur of the moment. So I like this idea of the metaphor that you use on a longer retreat or training session. Can you just give me an example of the type of metaphor or imagery that you'd use over a longer program?
Well, that's a good question. Let's see. Well, the last one we did, it was working on strategy. And so this is a team that's been working on innovation for about 2 years. We've been going away 4 times a year for 2 days. And now it's coming to the point of strategy. And so the Greek word is strategeo. And there the theme was the general. And that's what it means in Greek. So the strategist is the person that leads the army into battle. And so the metaphor there of a strategy is leading people into a new problem that they're trying to fix. And then from there we moved on. It was based on a book, Good Strategy, Bad Strategy. And there the metaphor is strategy as a first step is doing a diagnosis, understanding what the real problem is. And that relates to my last blog post, which is the 7 rookie mistakes leaders make when leading teams remotely. And the first mistake would be to fail to do a diagnosis, to reassess what the real problem is. Other metaphors that I've used, the heart, cardia. I've also used for innovation, architecton, which is the master builder. So if you want to be an innovator, you want to be an expert in innovation, you want to be a master builder of innovation. I don't know if that answers your question.
It does. And one question I have is, it's something, I don't think it's so much my question, but it's a question that a lot of people have is whenever you tell people about stories or using stories in this type of environment, a lot of people who haven't been exposed to that or haven't been paying attention always think it's a little strange. Why you're going to tell a story about your grandfather in a corporate training? That's not something that, unfortunately, most people have been exposed to. My experience with that is stories always work. If you tell a story, people listen to you. And if you pick the right story, then it has much greater impact than you just lecturing them about it. But has that been your experience with using stories in environments that are supposedly not suited for this type of fancy or less professional thing?
There, the trick is the delivery. Right? If you can deliver the story relatively short at the beginning and then make a clear link to the theme, and if the theme is you did the brief meeting correctly and you understood what is going on with that team, then it instantly clicks. They make a connection between, this nice story or weird story with, this is what we're going through. So if you do, and when I manage to do that well, it's an awesome effect. You see, they're hooked, right? And then you can come back to that theme and that story throughout the 2 days. And then you end with it and it becomes nice and harmoniously. Sometimes if the story, if I didn't find the right story or picked the wrong story and that connection is not clear, then you see that it's a bit of a copy paste. Other than that, I haven't had problems. I had one training, but this team came in, they didn't want to do the training. So whatever I threw at them, they weren't going to like. Even if I danced the tango in my underwear, they were going to buy it.
I don't think anybody's going to like that, Tobias. I don't think there is ever a right moment for you to dance the tango in your underwear. Whatever club it tells you.
I haven't given my hopes up, my friend.
Okay, so you had touched on something which I think would be remiss not to talk about is obviously teamwork looks a lot different right now than it did a few months ago or at least the look of it looks very different, because at the moment across the world, I think something like a third of the world is working from home. And I know there are very few companies that actually have that as their normal modus operandi. I think the numbers in America are only 5% of people work from home. And I doubt that Spain is significantly higher than that. So I wanted just your take on, just to expand a tiny bit on if there's one or two things that people should be doing right now to get through this period, and also your take on the viability of remote work for teams going forward, which is something we hear a lot now as something that might come in a lot more. Because a lot of companies are realizing, perhaps I don't need to spend all this money in a very large office if my team can work from home. But obviously there are challenges and obstacles there.
I started thinking and I got a bit lost. So could you recap what are the two questions?
So you touched on doing a diagnosis as the first thing you should do when working remotely. But, if apart from that, what is the one thing that anyone working in a team remotely right now should be focusing on? So that's the first thing I wanted to know.
So the easiest answer is to read that blog post that I have. It's on tobiasrodrigues.com. You click on goodies, which is the blog, and you read the 6 rookie mistakes. And they're very simple things. They're across the board. What we really want to, teams really, or leaders, whoever's leading the team right now wants to take the opportunity to really stop. And that goes to the diagnosis. Understand what is the new challenge. And I'll give you a simple example. So our daughter, she's 6 years old and she's going to be home, and she goes to a private school. We chose a private school because it has English, and I speak to her in Portuguese. And right, so now we have the ease that teachers are checking in every single day, 3 or 4 times. And she gets live classes. She gets to hear her colleagues, and then she has her little homework, right? The school hasn't done this, and I'm not surprised, and I'm pending to talk to the director, which is assess the new situation. The school is trying, and they said this, is trying to achieve the maximum amount of the academic objectives that we can. That is a wrong diagnosis of the situation. Right now, what schools want to be doing is reassuring that the children are well and fostering that well-being along with some education of math. For instance, in Canada, the government has said everyone has already passed the year. You're not worried about that, right?
Yeah.
So this is a practical example of reassessing the situation. What is it that we're really going through? This is not business as usual. It's not, people are at home and now we're continuing to work from a distance. No, we've got a whole new thing going on. A second thing that's a very simple tool is you want to make sure introductions, expectations, and roles, right? So introductions. Make sure everyone knows who's on the team, and use a metaphor of a sport. If you don't know who's on your team, you're not going to play very well. And this happens very often. And it's not the first time. It's not new. I've been dealing with this with the PRBB, remote teams. People come in, people leave. They don't really know who they are, who's in the team. So make sure people know who they are a little bit, what their names are, where they come from. Second thing, align the expectations with the objectives for the work. Don't assume stuff. This is an opportunity for not assuming. When Benny Hill said that assume is to make an ass out of you and me, there's going to be lots of people making asses because we assume stuff and we're working remotely and we can't check those assumptions. So what is it that we expect? What are the bits and pieces that you can't screw up? What is really, really, really necessary? And what do you expect from us on the other hand? And then third is the signing of roles, who does what and who's accountable for getting that stuff done. Other than that, and this is the last thing, is open channels for feedback. create new challenges for people to talk to you. I haven't been out, going back to the example of my daughter. There was an opportunity to talk to the teachers and, let us know how the work was going, but there wasn't really that opportunity to sit down, creating an open forum where parents can share with the school what their experience is like. So that would be the third thing that I'd say: create new channels of feedback where you can hear suggestions and the struggles. And then finally, to close it off, is the appreciation. This is a tough time for everyone. Everyone is trying to do their best. Show appreciation for everything everyone on your team is doing. It is a mistake for leaders today to expect their teams to push through. It's their job as the leader, right? They're the ones that want to show the hope, the appreciation, the positive feedback. They're the ones that want to say, "Kid, this is why I am the leader. It was for these moments that I have been paid and that I've been working on. And we can do this. Let me know what you need," right? So that positive, that inspiration, that motivation to get through this time.
And then just to wrap up, what is your feeling about, once this goes back to whatever we think of as normal, do you think that we're still very far away from companies embracing a more remote approach to work and letting people be separate physically? Do you think that's still a pipe dream for the next few years? And would that even be a good thing from your experience of companies that do that, or having people in the same place?
Well, will it be a good thing? Yeah, like any instrument or any method, you could be used well or not. The other day, I had a chat with our friend Connor Neal from ESA Business School in Vistage. And like one of the things he said, lots of the meetings I'm not going to have, if it's not someone that I know or is my friend, then I'm just going to do it on a Zoom, because I'm not going to move into town. I'll just do it on a Zoom. It's much more practical. It gets done. So there are some things that are going to stick, and some things are going to stick well. What's going to be the guiding criteria? It's not going to be an ideological thing. It's going to be a very practical monetary thing. So companies that figured out that they could save money or optimize work through remote work, they will do so. If some companies, based on their industry or the way they're set up, it doesn't work, the job doesn't get done, people are unhappy, then they'll go back to what they know. What will be the major deciding factor is the amount of time that we stay in confinement. Because if, I've started doing a little bit more videos now, and I bought myself a camera and I'm fidgeting around with the whole thing, because most of my work was face to face and I was happy with that. It's what I've done. And if tomorrow they ended confinement, I probably wouldn't do many more videos, right? Now, if they keep this up for another 6 months, then you bet that by the end of those 6 months, I'll have a couple of things that already become second nature and that are working for me. So how much of it will stick will depend how long we are in confinement. What will be the criteria is if it works, if it saves money, if it makes people happier, they will do so. If it doesn't and people don't manage to get the work done, they'll go back to it. What is the long term? What would be my dream for this? I think that lots of the work could be done remotely and that people get together when it is only really important. So if you can stay home and do your work from home and then, go in for strategic meetings once or twice a week or whatever it is, depending on the nature of the work that you're doing. In my line of work, it's like get the team together, go away physically and, use those 2 days to really do a lot of the heavy lifting. And then, which is the work with companies that are, that I've been working with and that have the best badass teams that I've seen. This is what they do. So they take the time, they go away, they do the heavy lifting, and then people are on their own from home or not traveling, but they only meet when it's necessary. And I think that's going to be one of the benefits. The companies or the environments that tend to have very long meetings every single day, I think some of that's going to go away.
And I think that if long, regular meetings go away, they are not going to be mourned by anyone. Tobias, thank you very much for your time, mate. This has been excellent. When the world goes back to normal, let's hope it's less than the 6 months that you just threw out there. We should catch up in person. Our daughters will be teenagers by then, or look like teenagers to us. It's been so long, but thank you very much, mate.
You're welcome, sir. And that's a promise. I'll have those bloody margaritas ready for you when this is over.
I fear them already. All right, everybody. Thanks for tuning in. Take care of yourselves. And until next time.